Welcome to the first ever session of Financial Fridays. It's my absolute pleasure to bring you this part of the series of micro webinars this year. And with MoveMe, we'll be hosting a series of interview blogs and micro webinars to speak about operational, financials, and business models. Shared mobility is truly diverse, be it in use cases, in modes, in the number of vehicles that you use, in technology, or even business models. In this series, we explore key financial aspects of these diverse business models, from sharing to subscription, even integrating MaaS. You will learn bits about operations management, utilization, electric vehicles, customer loyalty, retention, factoring technology pointers, insurance, whatever you can think of. This month's session, as we kick off the series, could be a little overwhelming for you guys, but we've got quite the mix in the experts panel. Basically, today we are talking about operations and supply and demand in specific. And the question would be around, how does operations management shape your financial model? We have experts from car, bike, and moped sharing businesses here. Let me introduce my panelists here. We have Andrew Rosskamm from Shift Transit. We have Moritz Meenen from ElectricFeel, and we have Anders Wall from GreenMobility. Would you guys like to introduce your companies and what you do there?
Sure, I can start. So GreenMobility, we offer car sharing services with entirely electric vehicles. We operate today in 7 European cities across 4 countries with a combined fleet of 950 electric vehicles today.
My name is Andrew Rosskamm. I'm the CFO of Shift Transit. I've been with the company since we launched in 2015. We are a bike share and shared mobility operations company. Manage bike share programs for city clients, and then manage scooter, car share, and paratransit operations for private sector clients. Our scope really varies from program to program based on the needs of our client, but we offer everything from maintenance and repair, rebalancing, charging, to customer service, marketing, and sales.
All right. Yes, I'm Moritz Meenen. I'm CEO and co-founder of ElectricFeel, and we provide technology and know-how to launch and scale shared electric mobility. So we're focused largely now on electric bikes and electric mopeds. We've enabled 18 projects, 18 cities, and 60 million kilometers of rides to date. And we've been working with bike sharing for a long time. Therefore, rebalancing as well, something very dear to us and of high importance. So thanks for having me today, Venkatesh, and nice speaking with you guys today.
I'm so excited. I have so many questions to ask you guys, purely because of the fact that all of you and your companies come from this experience of volume, and you've dealt with quite a lot of vehicles on your platform and your businesses. So here we go. The first question. What factors do you say would matter the most in operations? Do you have like a most difficult one to tackle? And it's open to all of you. We'll start with Anders.
Sure, thank you, Venkatesh. Well, I think for us, and probably the same for my colleagues here, is that availability ultimately drives our customer behavior. When using an EV, we see very clearly that there's a maximum of distance that people are ready to move, at least in terms of getting a car. So availability comes down for us in operation, and then naturally that brings back to our fleet management and how we move the cars if needed. And ultimately, and that comes down to our team, but also our system that runs behind it. So monitoring the vehicles all the time, where they are within the zone, but also in relatively to the time of day, the day of the week, and so forth. Then for our customers, once they get into a car, I think it's down to maybe 3 things. One, the battery level, how far can I go, even though in reality it doesn't really matter that much. average trips are around 7-8 kilometers, then it's a matter of cleanliness and ultimately damages as well. So the appearances that when you get into a car, does it smell nice and so on. So for us, in terms of operation, it's about managing damages when they happen, and to what extent do they happen. How quickly can we handle these, and of course, naturally, at as low price as possible. And in combination with that as well, keeping the fleet clean at all times. This is something we handle internally. We have our team all insourced, so they're part of our organization, which for us is a big help because we're able to do it much faster, and I would say also more efficiently when we compare to some of our competitors.
Hey, here I think you mentioned a key point about maintenance damages and managing the whole vehicle's fleet. And I know Shift Transit does this like all the time. So 100% of these things are handled in various modes, I must say. So I think, Andrew, how would you say that factor matters?
Yeah, in the world of bike share operations, I would say the three most important factors driving the success or failure of the program from our perspective are asset maintenance and repair, first and foremost, bicycle rebalancing, and then customer service. Each category certainly presents its own unique challenges. I'm not sure it's the most difficult, but certainly the most important factor in my view is the asset maintenance and repair, which in our world includes bike maintenance and repair, bike station maintenance and repair, in addition to routine bike and station inspections, safety checks, cleanings. Really the number one thing we can do to promote ridership and revenue in our programs is keeping the bike fleet well maintained and keeping a sufficient number of bikes out in the field. This correlates much more directly with ridership gains than rebalancing or even marketing initiatives, which are certainly important as well. But I would say bike maintenance is the most important factor. And then from a business model standpoint, asset repair is our largest cost bucket, certainly, between spare parts and the costs of bike mechanic labor. In our programs, those combined account for at least 25% of total operating costs. The nice thing about asset repair is it's quite predictable. The key to doing it well is just having good data and good planning. So based on historical ridership patterns, weather forecasts, we can pretty accurately forecast exactly how many bike incidents we're going to have in a given week, what associated spare parts we need for those incidents, how many mechanic labor hours we'll need so that we can get those bikes back into the field efficiently and as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so you mentioned about customer service, and you rightly so, you linked it to keeping the assets online. So it's more to do with like mitigating downtime. And I think Moritz, from a technology point of view, how would you see, because you have a bird's eye view over operations, so how are you able to draw your difficult parts?
Yeah, thanks. So data is definitely key, making the most of it. And on top of that, we're having lots of conversations with ElectricFeel operators. And what I find quite interesting and relevant is, one, it can be different from city to city or even country to country. And even more so, it's relevant what stage of the project that you're in. So I want to give an example for the latter. So when you launch in a potentially very competitive market, then you will prioritize probably availability, like Anders mentioned in the beginning, right? So ideally, you want to have your vehicles there and at the time when and where people need it. Of course, maintain with the range that you want to have in place, right? But this could come at a high cost as well. So I think that's also to be taken into account when we speak of what matters in operations is do you want to be lean in a certain phase, or do you want to be aggressive to launch and acquire lots of customers and then retain them as well, right? But then going back to the original statements of what matters, is one more thing that our customers, the operators on ElectricFeel platform, have to care about, which is battery swapping, because all the vehicles that we're operating, they have actually batteries that are not charged on charging station, but there are teams that are riding around and they're swapping these batteries, which is on the one hand side, it's great because you can penetrate a new market quickly without needing to worry about is there infrastructure in place, and if not, talking to cities about building that infrastructure and all the capex involved. But you can go straight for the market, and the downside, of course, being that on top of what is already the rebalancing challenge that Andrew started talking about, with now battery swapping, you have an additional cost driver that you need to get under control. And that's a challenge that we're, of course, concerned with and trying to help our partners there.
That's great. So that leads me into second question anyway, and that was a great segue, Moritz. Thank you. Into rebalancing, and specifically when you talk about micromobility today, battery swapping in electric vehicles. And Andrew, Moritz also mentioned, and you definitely talked about keeping these vehicles linked up to the system. What's the experience, or what's the changes in terms of electric bikes or scooters in terms of rebalancing, and how does Shift Transit see that affecting in the operations?
Yeah, in terms of the impact rebalancing has both on operations and really on the business model and the financials of the program. In bike share, the short answer is it depends. It's interesting, we have programs where rebalancing really is not a critical issue, just based on the natural ridership patterns of the program, that the program tends to rebalance itself pretty well. And then we have other programs where rebalancing is absolutely critical, where there's commuter ridership patterns, which leave bikes in the downtown core, or specific weekend casual ridership patterns where without rebalancing you're going to end up with many full stations and many empty stations. So given the differences across programs, and then even the differences within a program, if you look at time of year, time of day, day of the week, it's really important to be, first of all, to be tracking ridership data in a nuanced and intelligent way, and then being really responsive to that data and trying to put together targeted rebalancing strategies that give you the most bang for the buck. Couple examples in our Toronto program, in pre-COVID days, we found that doing rebalancing almost exclusively overnight was by far the most productive thing we could do. Traffic during the day in Toronto is very challenging, and then we'd also see a huge ridership rush during the morning commute. So setting the fleet for that morning rush was critical, and was the most effective way we could deploy our rebalancing resources. Then once the pandemic hit, of course, that completely changed. We saw commuter traffic completely go away, and then we saw new ridership patterns emerge where afternoon casual ridership increased significantly, weekend casual ridership increased significantly. So of course was critical to pivot at that point, move away from the overnight rebalancing. Also, car traffic was no longer an issue, and really pivoted towards targeted rebalancing during those afternoon shifts, during those weekend shifts, specifically targeting casual stations. So yeah, again, it depends, but I think being reliant on data and being targeted with your approach is the best way to go.
I know, Anders, in Europe, you had mentioned in our previous discussions that you had many many hoops to jump across. So that way, in terms of EVs and cities and placing green mobility as one of those solutions to bridge the gap, how did you overcome those operational challenges, city regulations and EVs?
And I think that's when we work with cities across Europe, where we have our main business. Is there's naturally a lot of different perspective, a lot of different sort of stages of charging infrastructure deployed. Here in Copenhagen, it's quite well, but we see other cities that are more or less in the beginning stages of that. And naturally, it has a big impact on how fast we can roll out our business in these cities. So we engage directly with a lot of cities, because ultimately it is a sort of win-win game at the end of the day. Most cities, they do want to bring in EVs, but who should invest in the charging infrastructure if it's not the city, and at what pace? So we can help them. We can help them specifically on what type of charging is needed, also potentially which locations, or at least in what distances from each other and the different charging stations. We also do the similar thing with charging companies, because at the end of the day, it's in our interest as well to have as many chargers in the streets, of course, and strategically located as well. Today, we use a combination of public charging whenever that's possible, but also combine it with private charging. So we have a number of hubs around the city where it's rented parking spots for our vehicles, designated as a hotspot in our app for easy location of vehicles for customers. And usually these places we will have private charging. So it is to sort of to balance the charging load, but also to make sure that we are not sort of taking up all the public charging space. So finding this balance between public and private charging, and that is something we can leverage on depending on the city and the existing charging network.
You mentioned about charging, and definitely green mobility is 100% exclusive electric vehicles. That way, I know that you don't have anything else to compare it in operational terms as such, but then how do you think EVs have benefited potentially in your business model?
I would like to see it more on a longer perspective, because on short term, it has been more expensive than comparing it to traditional car sharing or car sharing with traditional vehicles. Because refueling a car is much easier. You don't have this range anxiety that is to a large extent still psychological to most users, but it is sort of what you used to the habits, the things that you do all the time. So it is more easy to operate car sharing with traditional cars. And even though a lot of people say they do want to ride electric cars, have a sustainable choice, reality is sometimes that you actually do something different. But I think where we see the big benefit and the balance is shifting at the moment is that cities, to more extent, are demanding that you need to have electric vehicles going forward. Some cities have specifically said that in order to operate car sharing, you need to have only electric vehicles. We see this in Madrid, in Paris already, and other cities are coming. So I think we've invested also going ahead. We've built up knowledge on how to operate electric vehicles, which is a different thing than traditional cars. The repair, the maintenance is different, especially when it comes to the drivetrain and everything, but also charging procedures. Because we do have to move the vehicles around. It's not just as simple as going to the nearest gasoline station. And it is more difficult to get the customers to do the charging task, even though we reward them. But again, it's a new habit, it's a new thing to do for a customer as well. I think we've invested very much in the future.
How do you think EVs have benefited or have created a challenge in terms of operations?
Yeah, so I mean, challenges is the ones that we described, I think, a bit right now. I would think from a technological point of view, there's also a lot to discuss, but the big picture is I think cities are shutting themselves, basically they're shutting out internal combustion engines. And this means if you're fantasizing about a moped sharing business with an ICE, with an internal combustion engine, right, then you're on the wrong track, because there may be a few cities that haven't considered yet. They have to explicitly ensure in tenders or license schemes that it needs to be electric, because it's already like the general assumption, almost common sense. But that just makes clear that it is electric already now. So at least for the vehicles that we're speaking of, bicycles and electric mopeds, then we only would consider electric ones. To bicycles, real quickly, we also have projects with mechanical bikes, I guess just like Andrew and Shift Transit. The thing is just that e-bikes, they add this aspect of sweat-free mobility for people that even aren't used to cycling. And therefore, you can get really people out of the cars, and you can have a much bigger market than you would look at if you had only mechanical bikes. At least that's how our partners are going into this market with. Yeah.
Yeah, and you also mentioned about city regulations in terms of micromobility and the zoning. Is that also something key to consider from a financial model perspective for moped sharing?
I mean, absolutely. Right now, it's a market that starts to really open up. So we see more and more cities that are experimenting with license schemes or tenders. And I think that this year we'll see a lot of this. Barcelona has been pioneering and experimenting with a new tender scheme that's quite restrictive, where then the number of licenses for mopeds is distributed amongst applicants that qualify. This is one way to do it. Another one is tenders. It's absolutely key that this discussion takes place now, and that other cities, new cities that want to go into there, they can learn from also the benefits, but also the some of the disadvantages of existing license schemes right now. So I think a lot to learn this year, and ideally there would be forums as well to exchange data and know-how to ensure ultimately what is the goal of citizens and cities, which is bringing these vehicles into the hands of people so they can let their car in the garage and take the e-bike or e-scooter.
So quickly, you have your feet, both feet in both continents, so to speak, Moritz. So would you say city regulations better in Europe compared to North America?
It's very different. In Europe, a lot of things, I've grown up in Europe, and you see there's like space is extremely scarce at the core of the cities. And so policymakers have been acting accordingly. So they're very proactive in thinking first, okay, how can we make this space efficient, right? And then in the US, there's more this phenomenon when a new business opportunity really kicks in mobility, then you'll have lots of providers all of a sudden. So the question comes, are they going to share the data with us as a city? Are they paying the fees that we can also benefit as a city, right? So it's a bit different approach to, but ultimately, I think everything will converge, and both data regulation as well as space regulation will come into play.
So to weave the whole thing up, one last question that I have for all of you is, what comes to mind when you think about utilization? It's one of the center pieces for shared mobility, as we all know, and it's linked to profitability for sure. But then, is it a one straight line approach? Andrew, let's start with you.
Yeah, at Shift Transit, we really pride ourselves in being flexible and adjusting not only our operational scope, but our business model as well to fit the needs and desires of our clients. So we have private sector clients who are primarily driven by maximizing profitability, but we also have public sector clients that think more in terms of financial sustainability, certainly, but are also driven by priorities like reliability and equity, and view bike share as more of a public transportation. So I'd say overall, certainly for a shared mobility system to be financially sustainable, utilization is obviously critical. But at least in the bike share world, it's seldom sufficient. And typically you need at least some element of public funding or sponsorship to really close that funding gap. In the scooter world, in the car share world, I would say, yeah, utilization is absolutely critical to driving profitability, at least over the long term, and being sustainable.
And Anders, in terms of operations, would your team keep aiming at like utilization, keep going up, like 80, 90, 100%? How does that
I think
go?
that's a very theoretical dream scenario. And we back when we started, we were looking at least in all the Excel models, some very high numbers. Realistically, I think they are very far away, and it probably will never happen because you see most people we have our habits. So we go to work, commuting in the morning, we go back in the evening. Maybe we have a trip in the middle of the day, but very few people are moving around all the time. So there is some kind of limit because at the same time we also have to have availability. So yes, we can have close to 100% utilization at some hours of the day, but I mean 2 a.m. no one's moving around, at least very few people. So yes, it is a utilization issue, and we need to of course increase that, and it is increasing. We've seen an increase since the start, and it's very much driven by again availability, but also change of habits. So more and more people are using it for more and more purposes. But remember, there's always sort of the upside of the cost side as well when we look at profitability and the financial part that we need to, like any business, you need to constantly reduce your cost or be more effective. We've managed to do that. So in our operation here in Copenhagen, we've actually shown profitability as the first EV car share ever. So it is fully possible, but it has taken us a few years to accomplish that, and I'm sure our other cities will reach that as well. But it is about driving all the small little operational elements every day. You can't lose track of anything because then we lose it.
Yeah, truly, yeah. And I know it's not even theoretical. It's unreal to have something as high as the utilization.
Yeah, we need to charge the cars as well. So I mean, you can run the battery down in a couple of hours, and it's going to take us three hours to charge it again. So
yeah.
Already there, you've lost the 100%.
That's there. And also in terms of costs, I think lastly, Moritz, when you keep increasing the utilization, we know that beyond a point, like Anders also mentioned, it's going to hit your availability, and then immediately it starts affecting people's habits. And once they're up there to like picking up that moped, that scooter, that car every time they want, and then you hit a sweet spot in utilization, and then it starts trickling down in terms of how people don't find availability, and then it's downwards, right?
Yes, I mean the challenge is really, there's so many problems to solve, and some of them are complex mathematical problems, especially around rebalancing and also this battery swapping, all these logistics, right? So you can push, and we all have to do an effort to push the limits there and squeeze out what's possible with technology, with data, right? But it's ultimately also people that in the field, doing these tasks. So you also need to keep that in mind. The thing that I find also interesting is always to look out in the market. What are the big seismic shifts in the market? So when you look at how acid prices are going down, lithium-ion batteries price has decreased by 80% in the last 10 years, right? So now we see pumping out from a lot of countries new e-bike designs, new e-moped designs with a fraction of the cost that you had it just 5 years ago. So there's also ways to see, some things we can immediately impact through the operational changes, but also other things come into play when you look a bit further into the world of the assets, or when you think of business partnerships that you can close, where you have a large number of big employers that are wanting a change right now. They say after the COVID world, when people are starting to get back into the office, then we want people to not use the car, but we want them to incentivize them to use the e-bike or the e-mopeds, right? So as an operator, you really want to ride that wave. You want to work together with these employers, and I think that's also ways how out of the box we can find new ways to improve the business case without even changing some of the core metrics inside.
As a takeaway, the top three from my side, from what I've taken from you guys, is availability drives behavior, and behavior drives cost in terms of utilization. In terms of utilization, and in terms of what choice of cars or vehicles you have, like modes or electric or non-electric or whatever, it has a higher cost in terms of assets, also maintenance, and the rebalancing bit. So that's something that we have to consider when you're designing a financial model. More information on these coming up in our series. Thank you, Anders, Andrew, and Moritz for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you guys soon.